there, and welcome to this very special episode of HomeTech.fm. Jason Griffin here. Very happy to have you with us. I am joined, as always, by my partner, Seth Johnson. Seth, how are you?
Doing well, Jason. How's it going, man?
It's going great. CES is over, and I still do not own a drone.
You're holding out. Did you at least get a hoverboard? Like when it doesn't explode?
I did not.
Oh,
great
man.
show.
Drones, hoverboards.
Yeah, indeed. It was another great CES, though. Have a lot of fun watching that show. It is definitely a high volume, high intensity ordeal in the tech world, and just, trying to keep up with the news, right? And all the stories coming out of there. It's quite an exercise, and I look forward to chatting about the show with you tonight.
Yeah, I'm glad. To some respects, like I look at all the stuff that goes on, and that's the kind of show that I would just get lost in for days, and I'm kind of glad that I don't go to it and just kind of sit back and watch the news feed. But I did get kind of jealous of Mike and Richard. Did you see they actually had a sit down like at the Innova booth? Oh yeah, man, I was
very
jealous.
Cool.
I wanted to be there, so it's like,
yeah,
oh guys, this is great. So we'll put a link to that show in the show notes. It's actually a really good podcast. I'll put a link to it in the show notes, and so you can go take a listen after we get done with our show here.
Yeah. So speaking of our show, a ton of stuff to cover here tonight. So let's just jump right in and get started. But before we do that, I do want to tease at the very end of the show. Be sure you listen all the way through, because Seth and I are pleased to present to you our very first installment of a Home Tech Awards, and we're going to do Home Tech CES Awards, and I think we're going to have some fun with that. So be sure that you tune into the whole episode this week. We look forward to sharing some of our best and worst of CES 2016. But before we get into that, we have quite a bit to cover. We want to start out, of course, by talking about the smart home. Obviously, it was a big theme at CES this year. We saw a ton of stories, and Seth and I are going to just sort of dissect that angle of CES and kind of look at it through the filter of some of the big players and what they were doing at CES, and then just a couple of the other little themes we saw. So let's start out with HomeKit. Seth, what did you think? What did you see on the HomeKit front? Anything catch your eye?
Well, yeah, I mean, I noticed that HomeKit has gotten more devices now. Like the first alert, smoke detectors come to mind, but there were a couple of other Elgato Eve light switches and sensor switches that came onto the market or were shown off at CES. I thought it was pretty cool that more and more devices are finally coming out for HomeKit to get introduced into that ecosystem. So, maybe reliability is kind of a question mark on there. I'm glad there's more options now, and we're starting to see products. So maybe the carrot for developers is going to be a little more stronger, and the carrot for Apple will be a little bit more stronger in the future.
Yeah, it did feel like, I think the word in my mind, breakout, is way too strong. But it did feel like a year that we started to finally see some movement. And like you mentioned a few of the specific products. Lutron announced support for their Serena and Savoya QS shades. So they've had their Caseta lighting has worked with HomeKit for a little while now, and now they've got shades as well, which I think is pretty cool. You alluded to some in-wall light switches, iDevices, Elgato Eve. So that's pretty neat. They've got some stiff competition in my mind against a company like Lutron, which is a pretty robust lighting system and probably comparable price-wise, I would imagine. But generally, yeah, saw a number of products coming out for HomeKit, and just cool to see. I think that we've talked about it a lot on the show, that we're just excited for HomeKit to finally start making its way into more products, and it's been sort of probably a sloppy rollout would be the best word that I could use for it. But this year it kind of finally felt like we're starting to see some movement there, so that's exciting.
Yeah, on the heels of the major Samsung, announcement that SmartThings would be, we talked at this at length last week, that SmartThings would be shipped with basically every product that they'll be pushing out next year. Like mostly all the smart TVs will have it, and then I know we talked about that smart refrigerator, and you and I were talking about that a little bit. Over the week, and it turns out the smart refrigerator could actually act as a SmartThings hub if you wanted it to.
Yeah, it can. I had made brief mention of that, and then I didn't really follow up on it purposely because I wasn't sure if I had heard it correctly. And since we recorded last week, I have confirmed that indeed the Family Hub refrigerator from Samsung is capable of acting as the hub of your smart home, the SmartThings hub, which I guess makes sense. I mean, it's an always on device plugged in. and plenty of room in there to fit kind of the horsepower, which is obviously pretty minimal, that they need to run that. And so I guess it makes sense. Seems a little silly though, right?
Yep. Well, I guess I'm going to have to be silly and do this. Man, I don't even know what to think about a refrigerator being the central part of your home automation system. But if that's your thing, more power to you, I guess.
What it calls to my mind is the fact that I think that the way the smart home is going to eventually make its way kind of into the mainstream isn't necessarily through purpose-built devices like we've seen with hubs in the last couple of years. But when it's built into devices that on their own perform a function, and then, oh, by the way, it can also act as a hub of your smart home. So things like routers, TVs, refrigerators, I guess. I didn't anticipate saying that in that sentence, but I guess now we're at that point. So
now we're there.
Anyways, you get what I'm saying, though. Like, these devices are able to provide value in a home in their own right, and then the smart home integration is obviously just an add-on.
Yep, the router is a very good example. We've seen that with Google's with the hub that they made, and I keep forgetting it. OnHub?
Is that
the name of it? Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a router, but it has probably most likely some capabilities for some smart home automation later on in the future. And I think, I always thought that like the Nest thermostat would have been a good hub. But
yeah, you've said that before. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I talked to some engineers about it, and they said the processors on them just would not be able to handle it. So
interesting.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not a thing. But it would make sense for a thermostat-like device to be a hub of the house, because again, like you mentioned, it fills in some of those check boxes. Always on, it's in every house. Mm-hmm. It has a lot to do with energy and kicking on the HVAC and heater of the house. So yeah, I guess we can kind of move on from talking about smart things and all that stuff and talk a little bit about. We touched more
on them last week as well, I'll mention. So if you're curious to hear a few more thoughts about smart things, they were kind of one of the early newsmakers at CES this year, and we touched on them last week in episode 93.
Yeah, so Amazon Echo was all over this year, kind of the darling of the home automation space, like Nest was last year. Amazon came out and released an API kind of over this last year, and everybody has wanted to do integrations with the Amazon Echo, and boy, did it show at CES. Yeah,
it was somewhat surprising to me, I guess. I know that we've talked about Echo a lot. We had Mike Wolf on recently for our holiday special, and he's very bullish on Amazon and their smart home strategy being a very smart play and a winning play. And I guess I was just surprised to see how much good press and good attention the Amazon Echo was getting at CES this year. I've been very skeptical about voice control, as you know. But it looks like they're starting to crack that code a little bit. And my issue, again, with voice control has always just been it's not good enough, it's not natural enough, it's not ubiquitous enough. It's going to take a long time for people to get used to using that sort of technology. But Amazon's strategy appears very effective. They've really put a lot into it. They've got that big Alexa fund that they're doing. I think it's like $100 million they're putting out there to kind of help people develop for the Alexa platform, and obviously they've got some deep pockets, so I think that's a smart play for them. And they're just making it very easy for developers. If you've got a product and you want to have a voice control interface and you don't want to go through all the trouble of starting from scratch, Amazon Echo and Alexa is a great place to look.
Yeah, and we've been actually toying around with some of those integrations. There's kind of like a little small, I guess what you would call an app store within the Amazon Echo app. Now, the number one or the first app that shows up, of course, is a fart app, which I was curious. Oh,
naturally,
man. Well, yeah, naturally.
Why wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's not very good though. Really, come on, gonna make a fart app, do it right. There's also like a Jeopardy app, which I thought was kind of fun. You could say, hey, let's play some Jeopardy, and it'll start asking you, it'll give you answers, and you have to ask it the question, and we had some fun playing that but a couple of the times the Alexa piece like translated something incorrectly and said some goofy word for somebody's name, and it was really tough to understand, which I haven't really thought about, like, usually, what you're talking about is saying, it's just not there and it's not going to understand us and our crazy accents and everything. But this Alexa thing has this crazy accent and I can't understand it half the time. So
I guess it goes both ways, huh?
Yeah, it goes both ways, right? So
yeah, I didn't think
thought
about
that was
that.
Interesting.
That's funny. Yeah, so a couple specific stories on the Alexa front. Vivint announced an integration, and that's, I would say, a big win for Alexa. They've got a very big footprint in that traditional kind of monitored security space, and seems like a natural sort of integration. There was an interesting little Bluetooth speaker that was kind of geared for young children. There was some interesting design on that product, and that was one that was really kind of mentioned as people were talking about Alexa. But again, I think it really comes down to just making it very easy for people to integrate voice into their products without, again, having to pour in all that R&D and really start from scratch. And so it's a smart play by Amazon, and certainly appeared to get a lot of traction at CES this year.
Yeah, well, and someone who wasn't really gaining any traction this year was Google. Like, virtually non-existent. I guess they were behind the scenes this year and weren't really like out in front of everybody, but didn't really hear anything about Google or Nest at CES this year. Yeah,
it was very quiet. I noticed the same thing and was surprised by it. It definitely wasn't what I necessarily expected, but generally, what I did hear about Google at CES really had to do with Brillo and Weave on that sort of end of things. And it feels early for those technologies. And Brillo is obviously, in case you don't know, it's like their operating system, kind of a scaled down version of Android that's meant to be an operating system for IoT devices. And then Weave is the language that they're using to communicate. Did see a couple of stories regarding Weave and Brillo that came up. I think Asus was doing some things. They had what was being called, I guess, an IoT hub. Really no details. I couldn't find on any detail on that really, but it runs on Brillo and is basically geared to be as it sounds, another hub for IoT devices. I think Kwikset had a lock that they were talking about. LG had some partnership things that they were alluding to. Details were very sketchy on a lot of this stuff. So it just generally felt very early to me. And even as I tried to dig and find some details, there just wasn't a lot there.
I just saw that Google announced their Google I/O. I don't have the date sitting in front of me, but I just saw that they announced that. And that's typically where they kind of drop their big bombshells of what they've been working on, especially around this is where we heard about Weave, I think just last year. So they probably didn't have very much to say in that space, but it sounds like they've just been in the background laying that foundation down for their home automation products that'll be around in the future. So it's all good stuff. I mean, you got to do the hard work sometimes. So
yeah, and interesting to note too that, like, companies like we're talking about Apple and Amazon and Google, really of these companies that we're talking about, Samsung is the only one with a real presence at CES. So it is interesting that these are some of the main big stories that we are interested in hearing about and that are very prominent and covered on the show floor. From companies that really don't maintain a presence there, but are obviously very, very much influencing kind of the future of the smart home. And so that's just sort of an interesting aspect of the story.
Yeah, well, one of the companies that was at CES this year and actually showing off their remote was a company called Neo, which we've had Raphael on the show in the past, and really excited about the Neo remote. I know it's a super like an internet darling remote, right? Like it's got a ton of money off their Kickstarter campaign, and they were showing off either a prototype or a working remote there at the show, and I saw a ton of pictures of it. A lot of people were talking about it. Richard Gunther over at Home On actually got to use it a little bit, and said he didn't care for the tactile feel of it.
The ergonomics.
Very ergonomic, but
yeah.
It's a beautiful piece of industrial design, he said. So I can totally respect that. Not every remote is for everyone. That's why every universal remote manufacturer that you and I have worked with, and I'm sure there are more, have a couple of models. But this seems like it's a pretty good shot up, first release remote by Neo.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great looking product. You and I haven't seen it in person, and I thought it was interesting. Richard's take on it. He did say again that he thought it was beautiful. I asked him to be more specific about what he wasn't a fan of as far as the ergonomics go, and he said it was kind of hard to reach. With one, kind of extending your thumb up towards the top of the screen. So it was just a little longer and, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you're holding a remote in one hand and you want to be able to really cover that whole remote and easily, I guess that was his complaint. And certainly, like you said, not every remote is for everyone, but I do think that in general, I was pleased to see that there were a number of stories and coverage related to, the traditional handheld remote with hard buttons and the importance of that in the smart home moving forward. And that's a theme that we've touched on the show before, and one that I feel very strongly about is that we've sort of gone down this road in recent history in terms of being sort of enamored with apps and what we can do with apps. And I feel like there's sort of this renaissance happening where people are realizing that, well, apps aren't the only way to control a smart home, and we need to start thinking a little more creatively about what we can do, and also just thinking about the good old-fashioned handheld remote. I mean, it's a form factor that's been around for decades, and there's reasons for that. So I was happy to see that people were kind of talking about that this year, and that it was getting a little bit of coverage.
Yeah, we have a Wired article that mentions Savant as a startup, which you had here in the notes. Is kind of funny. Whoever heard of Savant?
Yeah, I caught that kind of the second time I had read it. And you know what? You can't fault the guy. Savant, obviously not a big name in the traditional, I guess, tech scene, and doesn't get covered a lot there. For home technology pros who kind of live and breathe this stuff, it jumped out at me. Thought it was kind of funny, but overall, a great article. Just talking about the handheld remotes kind of place in the smart home of the future. And the very last line I thought was great. It says the future has buttons, and I couldn't agree more. I think that's a very important aspect, and one that we shouldn't forget. One controller that I did see that I thought was very cool, and I'm not going to touch on it too much because we're going to actually get to it later, not to give too much away, but the 7 Hugs remote control. And it was a prototype very early on. And just kind of the really quick version is that it sort of a handheld remote that kind of adapts depending on where you're at in the house, what you're pointing it at. It can kind of be an adaptable interface. And I thought it was very cool early on. Again, just a prototype, but really neat, and just a creative way to think about control in the smart home. So I thought that was really neat.
Yeah, I'm looking at pictures of it. If we're going to talk about it later, I'll hold off. But this isn't tactile, Jason. It's all touchscreen.
I know. And we will get to that. We will get to that.
All right. Sounds good.
So anyways, that was obviously a big story to me this year, and one that I was definitely paying some attention to. One of the other big things that we saw in the smart home came a little unexpected to me. I don't think it's a completely novel concept, but there were a number of people showing smart home and smart automobile, smart car integrations, and I think that's a very natural integration. I'm curious to see where that goes, that sort of continuity, the home and the car, those are two places that we obviously spend a ton of time, and there really hasn't been a lot of creative work done in that space yet to really tie those two together and make it kind of a continuous experience. And I thought that was an interesting theme of this year's CES.
Yeah, we saw a couple. Well, last week we heard the rumor that Control 4 would be integrating with a connected car of some type. And I thought it was interesting, but I guess they introduced a proof of concept app that will go on to this Livio platform. I've never even heard of this, but it doesn't really say anything because car technology and your radio and everything in your car are from the 80s anyway.
Right.
The technology just does not advance very fast. So they were showing off integration, basically giving you a button on your dash when you're getting home. You hit arrive and it starts kicking things on inside your house, or if you're going home you can hit another button. I thought it was okay. It seems like just another app to me, but it's an interesting concept, and I guess that's really all they were showing off there.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So there were a couple of other, I saw BMW had integrations with smart things that they were announcing. There were just a couple of other cars that were showing up. Ford, Fiat, and Chrysler, I think, all had CarPlay and Android Auto. So it was a big show for car tech as well, I guess.
Yeah, it was. And I'm curious, we heard about CarPlay last year at some point. I actually wasn't familiar with Android Auto, but was not surprised in any way to hear that they had sort of an answer to CarPlay. And these are really geared to be infotainment systems in the automobile. I mean, there's not a direct tie-in yet to the smart home when you start talking about a CarPlay interface. It's basically an extension of your iPhone, but like the iPhone is increasingly obviously becoming integrated into that HomeKit ecosystem. And so I think there's a natural progression that's going to happen there. And I think it will be interesting to see. Control 4 is using, or at least their proof of concept is using a software called Smart Device Link. And that's like an open source framework for in-vehicle interfaces and infotainment systems. I researched it a little bit. Seems like just like what it sounds like. There's a community of people who are into advancing this sort of interface. It's, I think, an area that's overdue for development and for people to get in there and think creatively. I know that you were we were talking before the show, Seth, and you were saying that it just felt like another app for you, and that really, we can do more advanced things with geofencing, and so you don't even have to press a button. And I can certainly concede that point being useful in certain applications, but to me, geofencing is one of these things that isn't always going to capture the nuance, and that's, I think, one of the challenges where having maybe you're driving home at 5 p.m. and your geofencing rule is like, at this time, if I'm driving home, do this, but maybe there's a certain night where for whatever reason you don't want it to do that, and you'd rather just be able to get on and tell your system what to do when you're on your way home. And right now you could do that with a smartphone, but I think having that one button, that push control of your smart home from the infotainment system on your vehicle, to me seems like a very natural progression, and I think that we'll continue to see development towards that goal.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested. I like the button a little bit better, like you're saying. Then it just feels more secure, I guess. I don't really like using the GPS all that much either on my phone because it has the tendency to run down the battery. Mm-hmm. But I'm warming up to this idea. Like if I know I'm heading home, I could hit a button and it could conceivably turn on the air at a better time. Like sometimes I work late. That way the air doesn't come on like at 4:45 to get the house nice and cool. It could come on later.
Yeah, but, like conditional logic can get you some of that. But so for instance, my geofencing might say, okay, if I live in Colorado, it's cold now. If I'm driving home at 5 o'clock, make sure the temperature is set to whatever set point. We might have an abnormally warm couple of days where theoretically you could have conditional logic that said, well, if the temperature inside the house is already this, then don't worry about it or whatever. But what I'm saying is that conditional logic isn't always going to get it. We hear examples a lot about, well, you get in your car, you drive home, and now your oven knows to warm up because you're cooking dinner. Well, how does your oven know, like, if you're cooking chicken or if you're cooking salmon, right? Like, it doesn't. You have to still have a way to capture that nuance. That's one silly example. But if you had a great home control interface in your vehicle where you could theoretically then just go on and say, okay, tonight I need the oven heated up to 450 or whatever, if you're going to stick with that example. So that's all I'm saying, is that it gives you that one extra layer of control and nuance that geofencing and, true quote unquote automation, is probably may never get you, is what I'm kind of getting at.
Yeah, no, I get that. All this becomes moot like when our homes actually become smart homes,
right?
And I think the work.
Are you holding your breath?
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, there definitely was a push, or the conscious effort that companies will be making this year to introduce AI into their systems. Some type of basic artificial intelligence. Who knows? I like it. We may see something. So
it's true. It's a good conversation, and we've kind of moved away from talking about just cars, but I think it's a great way to kind of wrap up our smart home conversation and just talk about that extra layer of intelligence that the smart home really needs to truly be smart, and adding that extra context. And we're getting there. It's going to take some time, but I do think that we're seeing continual steps in that direction, and I'm excited to see what the future holds.
Yeah, one little honorable mention there goes to Ford for using the Ford Sync to Wink.
Sync to Wink.
So, yeah, we just had to say that. I was looking there.
Do you think the rhyming had anything to do with their vetting process?
I don't know, but that's pretty funny actually. I'm wondering only about if it will alert me if I need to stop and pick up some eggs.
Good question.
Yeah.
Very good question.
That's really. I would buy a Ford car just for that. Ford, hope you're listening.
It's the little things.
Yeah, and then another thing they had, again, another integration with the Amazon Echo. I did see this one. You could actually tell Echo or Alexa to... it was really funny how you had to phrase these things. I think it was something like, hey, Alexa, Ford, start my car, or something like that. And you could actually have your car crank up, while it's in the driveway or whatever. By voice, by integrated right through the Alexa, which I thought was interesting, but the verbiage that you had to say to actually get it to work was just very awkward. So
right,
that'll have to get worked on. One of those voice control things that'll have to get worked on. But
most definitely,
pretty cool. You can start your car and lock your doors just by yelling at a little tube over in the corner of your room.
No, it is very neat. And you could check fuel levels as another example they mentioned, which I think is kind of cool. It's not going to be something you use all the time, but if you're kind of rushing to get out the door in the morning and you can't remember if you need to stop to get gas, that could be a useful thing. So again, little things like that. And once they can get that nuance of voice control down to where we can actually talk to it in a natural way, then I think voice control is going to be huge. And I don't think there's any question about that. It's just a matter of how long it's going to take them to really get to that point where we can speak naturally to our devices and not feel awkward and have to repeat ourselves constantly.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, saying, hey, do I need gas is a lot easier than saying, hey, Alexa, ask Ford if I need my gas. It was really weird. I'll try and find a link to the little phrases, key phrases you had to say. But yeah. All right, well, CES, it's a big TV show, and there was certainly a lot of TV news that happened. I'm really excited about some of the stuff that they announced, and then kind of bummed out at the same time. So
right, LG, we don't talk about TVs a lot on Home Tech, and for better or worse, we just haven't. But with CES, it's kind of hard to ignore, right? Like you alluded to, it really is a TV centric show, and all the big names are there, and obviously, there's a lot of TV manufacturers that we're not going to get to. We're really going to focus on kind of, I guess, what I'm calling the big four. So LG, Samsung, Sony, Panasonic. And Seth, I think you were going to lead out there. Let's start with LG.
Well, yeah, LG is the one I'm excited about to watch next year with their OLED TVs.
Yep.
Those have the most striking picture of all the TVs. I think most anybody agrees it's the the power of the plasma with the brightness of the LED driver. So I mean, the quality of plasma, I guess is where I was going with that. This looks like they're going to be their flagship TVs. So a 65 and a 77 inch. The 65 inch, I love your note here, should be under $10,000.
Yeah.
77 inch, unknown.
Yeah, not a lot of pricing info on some of these specific models we're going to mention, which isn't surprising. That's normal for CES. This thing is 1/10 of an inch thick, which is remarkably thin. I mean, it's really unbelievable. You got to see a picture of it to even really wrap your brain around how thin that actually is. And like you said, the picture quality on OLED, I got a chance to look at some of LG's OLED TVs out at CEDIA, and it's beautiful. It's a gorgeous picture. It's really, OLED's kind of really about those deep black levels and rich colors. Generally, the people that are selling against OLED, so the other manufacturers like Sony and Samsung, tend to point to the fact that it can't get quite as bright as like an LCD-based technology. But at the same time, it's plenty bright, particularly if you do have that kind of one room in your house where you have a little bit of light control, maybe a media room or a theater, and you really want kind of that best of class viewing experience, I think LG is truly the one to beat. Again, generally a little expensive when you compare them to kind of LCD technology, but it's coming down, it's getting there, and it's an amazing technology.
Yeah, I mean they have them side by side at most stores these days. Not these like fancy ones, right?
Right.
But they do have OLED TVs that are shipping these days, and you can go see, brightness or not. Like I don't need my eyes to bleed from the brightness of the TV. What I need is a good quality picture, and it's night and day when you look at the OLED versus even a high-end HDR 4K TV. They're a very nice picture. So I it should be interesting. I like that it's a tenth of an inch thick, or 2.5 millimeters.
2.57 millimeters. Yep.
Yeah, that's insane.
That is, it's nuts.
Kind of just a piece of glass, at that point. So we may be getting there one of these days if we can get rid of all the connections and just have minimal electronics on the TV. That it's just going to be a piece of glass that we hang on the wall.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might have even been LG, was showing like a rollable display. I don't know if you saw that. I did see the invisible displays that we had talked about, like from Infocom. I think you saw those there. Mm-hmm. They were showing off in the invisible displays where it looked like a frosted glass shelf. Right.
Or you could see through it when the TV was off, but when it came on, it was just a beautiful TV picture.
It's amazing.
They actually were showing that at the show. Yeah.
Yeah, really, really cool. So anyways, LG just kind of continues to drive innovation in OLED. They've been carrying that torch for OLED for some time now. And I think I was kind of researching it a little bit. I think Panasonic has one OLED model that I'm aware of, and I think that's it. I don't know of anybody else who's really doing OLED, at least among the manufacturers that we're talking about here. And so really LG kind of has its stake on that OLED, and they're kind of betting the house on it. And I think that it's an exciting technology, and I'm just curious to see if they can get those prices down to a level that competes with LCD-based technologies.
Yeah. Everybody go buy those OLED TVs so they'll come down and I can buy one next year.
Right. Exactly. So next one we want to talk about is Samsung. We talked about them last week, and really of all of the players, they seem to be the one that's putting kind of the most emphasis on sort of being a hub more than just a TV. They want to be kind of the center of your smart home. They put a lot of emphasis on their smart TV features and the ability to kind of integrate over-the-top content into your viewing experience. They announced an integration with Time Warner Cable that will allow you to kind of get rid of the set-top box, and now the TV is your input zero, which is kind of a term that I think we've talked about on the show, and is what all of these companies are kind of striving for. And I think, that stuff makes sense in certain applications, doesn't get me particularly super excited. When I look at a TV, what I want is just a great display. I don't need all the bells and whistles and fancy apps and all of that. I just want a picture that looks really good, because I can handle all that other stuff with set-top boxes that I feel like do a better job, and that's just my personal take on it. They continue to defy any sort of, rational thought with their emphasis on curved TVs. I'm just not sold on that concept, and they're really just continuing to bet on that technology. And I don't know. I scratch my head a little bit with that one.
Yeah, I'm looking at a picture of the flagship KS9500. No, come on, really?
Yeah.
It's a flat panel TV. Our walls are flat. Maybe if you lived in like a circular building, this would be great.
Right.
I just don't understand the curved. It does make sense, I guess, if you're like wanting to get immersed into it and you have a small room with a big TV in like an apartment or something. But man, these are large TVs, and the curve thing just doesn't make sense. And
it doesn't do it for me at all. I think it's a good point. If you had like a small room, I could see the application being kind of cool if you're into gaming, and maybe you've got like a relatively smaller gaming room, and you're a little closer to the TV, and you could really get that immersive experience. But generally, to me, just feels like a gimmick. It's funny you mentioned living in a curved house, because there was one installation that I worked on when I was still living out in Los Angeles, where there was a small office kind of to the front of the house. It was like an office library, very small setup, and it was a circular room. And we mounted a curved TV in that room, and it looked great. And I was like, well, I guess that's the ticket. All you need is like a circle room, and then it's a really cool TV.
Yeah, this must be the TVs that Apple are putting in their new campus there, the big circular donut building that they're building. So, yeah. Oh, man. All right. Well, enough on Samsung, I guess. You want to touch on a little bit on Sony?
Yeah. And Sony is they're a line that I'm a big fan of Sony. I think as far as like the LCD-based technologies, I feel like they have really got a beautiful picture, and I like what I'm seeing out of Sony. They really do HDR. That's kind of their big pitch right now, is they're really all about HDR. Kind of the tagline, Sony knows HDR from the lens to the living room. And they're sort of staking their claim on the fact that they understand the whole HDR ecosystem because of their cameras and the Sony studios and everything that they do along that, I guess, production line of video content, right? And who knows how much of that knowledge actually carries over into them making a really good TV. But I do know that their TVs are beautiful, and I loved what I saw out of Sony when I was at CEDIA. It is a line that we sell here if we're going to sell TVs. It's kind of our go-to line, and I am a big fan of them. They're really, again, staking their claim on HDR, tri-luminous, their color gamut range like technology that we won't get into the details on is a big marketing push for them. And I think beautiful TVs, and they continue to kind of innovate and drive sort of the technology behind creative backlighting. That's one of the big things they were talking about, is sort of their grid array, local dimming that they were doing, or slim backlight drive. And so that's all about really being able to manufacture still a very thin TV, but one that can do very precise dimming, so you get your dark black levels and really brights. And so that's kind of their big technology that they're pushing and advertising. And I think that what they're doing looks really good.
Yeah, I'm kind of amused. It's like Sony, how they sell TVs. It's like selling computers in the 90s. Like, oh, this is a Pentium 3 with, oh man, they've got like all the like, oh, slim quantum.
They do have a lot of marketing terminology. Yeah.
Oh, come on, right, guys. Yeah, it's just, okay, it's a nice picture. One thing to note, like we are talking about probably the ones you're selling, and the ones that I would sell are the XBR line, which are their top tier. There is quite a slope off of that ledge once you leave XBR. I think there's one series that I would touch, and then after that, the Sony products are not all that great.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, stick to the high end on Sony, which does match up price point with the high end of Samsung. So, and hopefully not curved. I don't see anything to indicate that they are curved. Then they're making just flat panel TVs like normal people should.
Right. Yeah, it's like you said, it's a great TV at the top of their line, the XBR. Big fan of their TVs, and again, they do sell against OLED, and basically their pitch is HDR. And with our slim backlight drive and our this local dimming that we're doing, we can get black levels on par with OLED, which I don't think they're nearly that low, but the perception is there. And so great TVs, definitely a great option. And they come in generally more affordable than an OLED. The last one we want to talk to is Panasonic, and they seemed a little quiet this year. I heard that they had a very small booth and not a very large presence out at CES this year.
Yeah, I mean, when I think Panasonic, I think one word: plasma.
Yep.
Like, that was the go-to. I even have one. I have an old Panasonic plasma. Yeah, beautiful picture for a 720 set, but it's a beautiful picture. And it's a beast. It's never gonna die. So
right,
I'm gonna have to keep it. But yeah, that's what I think of. So it's really odd to be talking about LCD technology in a Panasonic to me right now. But they've always made good TVs. They've always made good TVs.
Yeah, definitely. And what I read was that their focus at CES this year was really about more commercial technologies and I guess digital signage and things like that. They're very big in the commercial space as well. Obviously, a very large company, and not exclusively focused on the residential market. But yeah, they did have a DX900, their Ultra HD Premium. It is the first, and we're going to get to this here in a bit, but the Ultra HD Premium certification. This is, as I understand it, the world's first TV that's actually on the market that's going to have that certification, I guess, is what they were saying. And so they're, of course, marketing that and pitching that as a big deal. And really one of the main selling points on the technical side for the Panasonic TVs is this, they're calling a honeycomb tech. And it's basically, again, it's all about the backlighting when you get into LCD. And advances in LCD technology really, by and large, have to do with the backlighting and how that is all driven. And the honeycomb technology is supposed to reduce kind of the halo effect, which, without getting into too much detail, is generally what prevents LCDs from getting down to those same black levels that a plasma could, or that an OLED can. So they're really pitching this technology as being able to get down to those black levels while still maintaining those areas of peak brightness, elsewhere on the screen. So that's their thing. And really, kind of the take for me with Panasonic this year was, when it came to TVs, they were about quality over quantity. They didn't show a lot. They didn't talk about a lot, but the one that they were pitching, they're really kind of pitching as, this is the premium TV. This is the TV that will show you the picture exactly as the director intended you to see it. So that's kind of their pitch anyways.
Yeah. I mean, that's Panasonic in a nutshell, I guess. They've always been kind of, after plasma went away, they staked their claim on plasma. Remember, they were making those 120-inch plasmas that were like $100,000 for a while.
Yep.
So that's been their shtick for a while. So glad to see they're still in the TV game, and like you said, they're more commercial than they are resi, but glad to see that there's at least an option out there to buy a Panasonic. Another big story that has been hitting from that really came before CES, but was on display. That's punny, right? At the show, was the UHD and HDR specs, I guess. The TVs that they were really showing off these two things, like ultra high definition and high dynamic range on the new TVs. There were a lot of different names for each one of these things, and I mean, we could probably have a whole show going over all the names and what everybody's calling everything. The
TV acronym special.
Oh, geez. I was thinking, like, we could probably talk about LCD technology one of these days and spend a whole 30, 45 minutes talking about halo effects. But, this is another show that we should put in our pipeline.
Right,
and talk
exactly.
about all this insane marketing gimmickry that they try and do. You're trying to figure out what a feature is. You just want to know what that feature is and check it off across the board on each TV. But I think, between you and I, UHD, that's the 4K thing, right? That's yep. Ultra high definition. That's 4K, which we've seen this last year. Like, most of the TVs that have been on the market have been moved up to 4K. But the bigger thing is HDR, and that is basically gives TVs a wider range of colors, that
darker darks and brighter brights, right?
Yep, darker darks, brighter brights, and more colors. Mm-hmm. Bigger color gamut that they can put, and that's a technical term for basically you get more colors, you actually get true colors coming from the TV, and things look a lot better. So that's the bigger story. You can put a ton of pixels, but if you don't have this HDR, or you don't have any contrast into your pixels, your picture's not going to look very good. It'll just kind of look washed out or kind of meh. But the high dynamic range, that is the spec to look for, and it has been the spec to look for, and they were really showing it off this year.
Yeah, no, I agree. This felt like it was a kind of a breakout year for HDR, and it was getting a lot more attention this year than sort of those extra resolution, the extra pixels, and I agree with you. I think you said it perfectly. It's if not an equally significant technology to having those extra pixels, it might even be a more significant technology, because it really does make for a better viewing experience, regardless of the size of your TV and your distance from the TV and other things like that, which can kind of impact how much those extra pixels will really make a difference on your viewing experience.
Yep. Well, that actually segues us perfectly into talking about our first annual CES awards from here on HomeTech. Let's jump into it, Jason. Your award for the most significant product or story that came out of CES this year was UHD Alliance announcing the Ultra HD Premium spec.
Yeah,
big news.
Yeah, it is, and I think the most significant story, we wanted to talk about something that we think really kind of exemplifies a long-term trend in home technology. And I felt like this UHD Alliance came out with this Ultra HD Premium certification and logo that manufacturers can kind of stamp on their box. And I think that the certification in and of itself isn't, to me, the most significant part of the story. The most significant part of the story is that exemplifies really the big challenge with UHD and HDR and all of these new technologies is kind of the standardization. And we talk about that a lot on Home Tech from the consumer's perspective. And when you're going out and shopping for a TV, how do you understand, how do you compare, get an apples to apples comparison across different TVs? And this certification will definitely, I think, help with that, at least in theory. It'll be a while before we really start to see it implemented. I think actually you had pointed out a story to me that if you look at the specs of this Ultra HD Premium certification, then you go back and you look at all the 4K TVs from 2015, actually none of them qualify, which is kind of, I guess, depressing in a way. But, if I were a consumer who had bought a 4K TV last year, I wouldn't get too hung up on that. It is just a certification. The reason I think it's significant is that it does at least show that the industry is trying to consolidate around defining what it actually means to be HDR. What's the color gamut specification? What's the brightness? What's the black levels? And I think that's important. And it's a big challenge, not just for consumers, but for studios and filmmakers who are putting all this stuff together. To have these definitions is a big challenge.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of leads back to what we were saying about earlier. Like, every one of these companies talks about the same spec or the same idea, like HDR. They'll call it a different thing, but then they can also implement it on their TV, differently. And this alliance says, okay, this is what, if you're going to say that you have a UHD or Ultra HD TV, this is the spec that you're going to have to live with. I'm just kind of bummed out that like the TVs that were sold last year as UHD TVs, or I mean, and they certainly were. Like, Samsung's marketing all last year was super ultra high definition, right? That was their SUD or whatever they were calling it.
Right.
That was their marketing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like, I think it's a bummer that TVs that were sold that were 4K 2015 TVs will never actually be able to be certified and won't. They probably won't even get this content made available to them. They won't.
I don't think that's the case, though. I think that it's not. This doesn't apply so much to content being only available on devices that have the stamp. Maybe I'm wrong, but I read this more as being just an effort to standardize moving forward. So if you're a manufacturer, you can still put out a TV and call it UHD, and it could still be a vastly superior TV to a 1080p set, and the consumer might still be getting a great buy. But if you want to put the Ultra HD Premium symbol on your device, you have to meet these specifications. And I think that the argument could just as easily be made that perhaps the bar was maybe set too high, and that's why the 2015 TVs were disqualified. I think that's what some people, the manufacturers, might argue anyways. But I think the fact they're setting the bar high is good. I think the fact that they're making a standard is good. I don't personally foresee people being blocked out from having certain content or capabilities necessarily. I think it's just a matter of degrees that we're talking about here. Gotcha.
Yeah, that makes more sense. It's not a matter of like you plug an HDMI cable into your TV and it's not going to work. It's a matter of like you're not going to get these extra special displays, even though you bought a TV thinking it was a ultra high definition TV in 2015. It's just not going to be considered one moving forward.
Well, it's not going to be considered an Ultra HD Premium TV. I mean, it really is just it is a stamp on the box. I mean, let's be honest. And that's why I was saying that I don't think the certification in and of itself is the significant part of the story. I think the significant part of the story is that there's a continuing struggle to define what it actually means to be Ultra HD. But at the end of the day, you've either got, the number of pixels or you don't. And so if you bought a TV last year, it's got the resolution, it is a UHD TV. It just doesn't quite meet that UHD quote unquote premium spec.
Right.
I wouldn't get hung up on it.
Yeah. Well, they're asking for 1,000 nits, which is peak brightness. Just nits is a measurement of peak brightness, right?
Yep.
And all of the TVs from last year were running at I just lost it. 450 nits, I think is what it says.
Gotcha.
I'm going to take that over. So anyway, I mean, it's basically the TVs last year weren't up to this full spec, and it's a matter of like marketing and calling it premium. But I think it's a bummer. Everything is always better the next year, and I guess you'll still have a nice picture on your 2015 4K TV, but the 2016 4K TVs with this little sticker on them are going to look a lot better.
Yep, you got it. Well, let's move on, Seth. What was in your opinion, what was the most significant kind of story or theme that you saw come out of CES this year?
Well, I was excited about two things. One, I'm just going to touch on.
You're going to cheat,
yeah,
huh?
I know.
All right, we'll let it slide.
I'm a cheater. We've already really covered one of them pretty in depth, and that was the integrations that we saw. Uh-huh. There were a couple of stories that we didn't talk about, like Ring, the doorbell company. They actually announced wireless cameras, like just like the Arlo wireless cameras that Netgear makes. But they look just like the Ring doorbell without the door button. It's kind of really strange. But anyway, they announced a partnership with ADT. Echo, again, was with everyone. There were all the car integrations and all that good stuff. ADT actually announced a Canopy API, which is going to bring their monitoring into other mass market devices like Ring, Wink, LG. All of these, will be partnering up with ADT, so ADT could sell monitoring services in with like a Wink hub, basically. Now
so, for the dumb guy in the room, Seth, a Canopy API, is this like a common term in development, or is that just like a branding thing?
That's just what they're calling it. Yeah,
gotcha.
ADT is Canopy. It's their API. So they're basically making like what essentially Alarm.com has done as well. Like it's ADT. I mean, that's everybody knows in the US, ADT is just this massive security company. So
sure, I just didn't know if Canopy was like a term describing the API, or if it was like just a marketing thing that this is what they're calling it.
Nope, just marketing. So, but I'm really liking that. Like that's really a cool thing for ADT actually to do, is to produce an API which third parties, that don't exactly make, security systems and don't exactly. It's not like you're not integrating with a monitoring station. I guess you are, because ADT is the monitoring station, but you're using an API and a third party device to do all that with. So I think that's a really progressive thing for them to do, and I'm glad to see someone's doing it, besides Alarm.com, I guess. So integrations, just kind of wanted to touch on that. That was really exciting to see all of this stuff going on, because we're integrators, right? So
absolutely,
good to see.
Yeah.
But I think the bigger story for me is I started seeing these things like about security and people worrying about security right around the beginning of CES. Now, the FTC, the head of the FTC here in the U.S. called for greater transparency on data collected by the Internet of Things. And that was right like on the second day of CES. So at that point, like, you start to realize like this could be a pretty big thing. We're all like throwing these little computers into devices and throwing them out there against the wall to see what sticks, and see we're putting computers in doorbells, and sticking them on the wall,
right?
And we expect them to be secure. Well, as it turns out, the Ring doorbell, there was a way that you could hack it a couple months ago. It looks like they patched it, but you could get the Wi-Fi password of the house and out of the Ring doorbell by doing some like physical manipulation to the device. Now, they did reach out to us and they did say that that's been fixed for months. It's kind of a non-story at this point, but that's one of those things that if it's not a company as big as Ring, or somebody that had just OEM something from China, that they don't have the ability to update the firmware, it could be a big problem, especially if thousands of these devices are out there and exposed onto the internet. It's just a place for hackers to get in and do something either to you, or more than likely what they'll do, and this is my prediction, you're going to see a hack done at some point that converts home automation, Internet of Things devices. I don't know what they are. I don't know which ones. I'm not going to name names because I have no idea. But you're going to see somebody make one of these botnets out of it that actually causes havoc on the internet, because all of these devices are just open little small computers, and you get enough of them, you get millions of them lined up, and you say, go attack this website. Millions of devices hitting a website at one time, we know causes all sorts of problems. So they could easily take down an entire website for a good long time, because all these millions of devices decide to go visit it. And I think you'll see that first. I think that is going more than somebody stealing your Wi-Fi password, which isn't that big of a deal. But we were talking about this a little bit in the beginning of the show. You made a really good point. If you use the same password for everything, which a lot of people do, and you shouldn't, like, if your Wi-Fi password's the same as your bank account password, you're doing this wrong. So like,
or like as your smart lock, the app for your smart lock, or whatever it is.
Right.
And so it really is a important thing to use unique passwords. I totally agree. It's not going to stop one device possibly from getting compromised, but at least it'll kind of mitigate the damage at that point. You reset a password, and hopefully there hasn't been any major damage done. But yeah, I thought that was kind of one of the things that really jumped to my mind, is like, well, if somebody got my Wi-Fi password, I guess if they were really sophisticated, they could probably wreak some havoc with that. But I use unique passwords for everything, so that would be really theoretically where it ended, anyways. It's I think it's a good discussion to have, and I was pleased to see more discussion about it at CES. I think information security, or InfoSec, is obviously a big topic in the industry, and it's one that we can only hope these companies are paying adequate attention to.
Yeah, and I mean, this comes on the heels of that. We didn't really talk about it because it's not really our shtick, but VTech, I'm sure you're familiar as a father, this company VTech.
Yeah.
They've been around for a very long time, but they had a security breach where they have this little connected like tablet for kids to play on, and the hackers got into this thing and like stole data for 30 million accounts, and over 200,000 of those were like kids' information. Like, it's just not good. But that could be bad. I mean, these little things have like cameras on them and whatnot. Like, man, I don't think it was that bad, but like, it just wasn't good, and it could have been a lot worse. I think for VTech. But 5 million. I'm looking at the story now. 5 million customer accounts and related kids' profiles were affected. Name, email address, password, IP address, mailing address, and download history. Doesn't contain credit card information. Yeah, well, who cares? You've got address and kids' names in there.
Yeah.
Really, really not cool. And I'm really hoping that we start to see some standards developed around security and what needs to be like the bare minimum that goes into these devices. And also, if you have a device that's connected to the internet, like, there should be a way to remotely update that thing when all goes crazy, because like that should be a law. Like, there should, seriously, that I'm not like one of those people that says that should be a law about everything, but there should be a law.
Sure.
If you connect one of these devices, there has to be a way to get this thing updated from the factory, because and the factory has to be responsible for that.
Yep.
This kind of stuff is ridiculous and cannot happen. So,
I agree.
That's
big topic.
That's all I got to say on it.
Yeah, no, and it's a big one. And the most significant product or story of the year, deserves a little bit of time spent on it. We're going to move through the rest of these, I think, a little bit quicker. We want to get through. We've got a few more awards we want to give out this year. In again, our first ever HomeTech CES Awards. So want to move now to coolest product. Seth, I'm going to let you take this one first. And this is just like it sounds. What was kind of that one product you saw that just sort of made you say, wow?
Well, this one, of course, I'm going to pick something that custom integrators are going to use. But I'm huge on video distribution. I always have been. I saw a really cool product from a company called Metra, which you probably will recognize if you're in the car audio world. They make they're like the company that makes all those little adapters that you would buy for your car if you had like an aftermarket head unit that you wanted to install. Like, they're the company that makes those adapters.
Mm-hmm.
Now they have come out with a multi-room HDMI video distribution system that connects through coax, and it connects through coax in such a way that you could use this in any home that had a a coaxial network setup, which is pretty much any home that
every
has
home
built. And,
ever built.
Every home. Yeah. So, and it basically, I guess the idea is that you can, there's a video we'll link to, pretty much explains it. You plug in your sources on one end. They all go into the coaxial splitter. You'll plug in the receivers on the other end, and you basically change essentially channels on the receivers to go through your sources.
Yeah, no,
that's great.
Looking at it right now, it looks interesting. I have to admit, anytime I hear HDMI over coax, I get a little bit itchy.
You cringe? Yeah.
But, if they can make it work, great. That could be really practical for a lot of people. So I think that's a good choice.
What about you?
Yeah, I actually picked one that we talked about last week a little bit. And so not going to spend too much time on it, but I think it really was the coolest product that I saw for a number of reasons. That was the new dish hopper. And I just think this new box is very impressive. 16 tuners on it, which is unreal. The ability natively to divide your screen into 4 different channels, so quad view, and then the Hopper Go feature, which is kind of put your DVR in your pocket with the little hard drive and go, and then you can watch anything that's on your DVR. And so I just thought there was really interesting, innovative features. We don't see innovation a lot in the set-top, the cable and satellite set-top box space. It's been a pretty stagnant area where we haven't seen any really truly innovative features, I feel like, for a while. TiVo would probably be the one exception to that, but they're a little bit different. So anyways, that was probably my coolest product. If I can cheat a little bit, I did see one other one called Screens, and that's spelled with a K, that we'll have to put a link up to go check it out. It looks like it's primarily geared for like gamers, but it's basically able to take, multiple HDMI devices. Additionally, it can take like internet feeds, so Twitter, social, Facebook, things like this, and also streaming, and can give you a variety of different views and layouts on a single screen. So this is akin to like Savant has their HDMI tiling solution. It's like that, a much smaller version, but can do a lot of the same stuff, and goes for like, I think the 2-port one was like $250, and then they got a 4-port one, and you can daisy chain them actually and make like an 8, 12, or 16 input module. And so really innovative feature. Curious how well it works. Lot going on with that thing, but definitely worth checking out. So definitely go to our website, HomeTech.fm/94, and look for that if you want to see kind of a cool overview of what that product's about.
Yeah, I like that one. I really do. I'm sitting here watching the little like animated pictures that they have showing it. Pretty much shows exactly what it's doing, but that $250, that's a lot less than the Savant version.
Yeah. I'll say. Yeah, definitely. But again, curious how reliable, curious how, integrator friendly, all those sort of things come into consideration, obviously. And the last thing I should mention, this is a technology that was actually on Kickstarter, one of the crowdfunding sites, months ago. They've been around for a while. So it's not a technology that made its debut at CES, but this is where I caught wind of it. So I thought I'd give it a mention here. Let's move on, Seth. Let's go to most innovative product. And this is a product that we found like very clever or unique, had kind of a twist that made it particularly useful. So we'll start with you. What you got?
Yeah, the first one I saw, and it's not really like a big deal or anything, but it's a little like projector from Sony, and I thought this was kind of cool. It projects a 23-inch image on any wall that you wanted to. So and this thing is like tiny, so you can go around and like stick it in a kitchen, in your kitchen next to the refrigerator or something, and you could watch, instead of having a TV built into your refrigerator, cough Samsung, you could just have one projected there temporarily. And
that's cool.
I just thought it was a good idea. Like there's always those times where you're like in a room that doesn't have a TV, and you're like, man, if I could just put a TV in here real quick. It doesn't need to be like I'm in this back bedroom here. There's no TV in here, but if I wanted one, I just have to get this little box and like plug it on. I don't know too much about it, like what the inputs are and everything like that, but it's small enough. It's totally portable. It's not made for like high-end AV, but I just thought it was really clever from Sony. So, it's probably pretty good and not bad. So hopefully there's more information I can dig up on this and put in the show notes. But
very cool.
They have their massive 4K one, which is like 30 or 40 grand. Yeah, that's a beast, but this is a little bit smaller.
Little different. little different.
Yeah, a little bit different. What about you? What'd you see?
Yeah, so I think the one that I picked was pretty unique. It's called Prism, and they call themselves like the music brain. And so it's not a speaker. It's kind of like a Sonos Connect that has like analog output and I think optical as well. Again, I don't actually know the details on the ins and the outs, but basically it's kind of like a Sonos unit where it handles streaming music and is of course controllable from an app. But you plug it into your receiver or your speakers or whatever it is. The thing that makes it unique is that it's really the reason why they call it the music brain is that it's all about kind of learning your tastes and making recommendations based on kind of what you like to listen to maybe in the morning versus in the evening on a Saturday or a Friday, right? And it sort of starts to learn this context, like to go back to that conversation we were having earlier about just that intelligence and adding that extra layer of context to your music selection. So really kind of a neat idea. And one other thing that I wanted to point out about it is that it actually uses, which I think could be a trend that we start to see more of, and I've alluded to it, is using wearables as a means of adding context to the intelligent decisions that it's making. And what I mean by that is that it might be playing a certain type of music if it's just you in the room versus when your wife walks into the room through whatever wearable she has, a Fitbit or whatever it is, it can integrate with that. And now it knows that both of you are in the room. And maybe when both of you are in the room, you like typically listen to a different kind of music, or maybe you have a talk radio show that you listen to, whatever it is. So again, it's just about that intelligence and that context and making recommendations based on it. And I think it was a very interesting approach and one that I'm curious to learn more about.
Yeah, that's pretty clever. I like. I'm gonna have to get a different bell or a different sound for you whenever you mention wearables.
Well, it's funny because it does come up, and it's certainly not something that like in passing we'll mention it here. I mean, I didn't see anything super compelling about wearables this year at CES. Actually, didn't make any notes on it. So I think it is kind of like stagnant right now, it feels like to me, and not a lot of like super interesting innovation going on in my mind, wearables in their own right. Where I think wearables get interesting is how they can add that extra layer of context to how we move through the world and through our homes and what can be done with that information. I think that's where the potential is.
Yeah, that's definitely pretty interesting and something we'll have to keep an eye on. It's kind of odd that wearables didn't hit this, there were rumors that this was going to be year of the wearables, but yeah, I agree. I guess what I did see that people were really talking about were like the VR headsets, which I could deal without for the time being. Like once,
right,
if that becomes popular in gaming, I can see that being really popular in gaming and but moving forward. But I didn't really see very much to do with or hear very much news outside of that particular aspect when it came to wearables.
Yeah,
so
not a lot going on there, at least that I saw. Let's move to the next one. We got two more here. The next one we're going to do is kind of the most intriguing or ambitious, and what we mean by that is a product that kind of represents a futuristic idea, maybe something that's still early on in the life cycle, but you feel like represents a potential for something that could be really great moving forward. So again, we'll start with you, Seth. What you got?
Well, I saw this this Bluetooth hub. I was gonna get it in. So
never gets old.
These guys, this company called Cassia has made a hub that basically connects 22 Bluetooth devices up to 1,000 feet. Now, the reason I think this is kind of like innovative and one to keep an eye on is that like Bluetooth, and we talked about this a lot last week, like where does Bluetooth sit? There's no real like standard for Bluetooth mesh networking or anything that exists in products today. But this little device could act as a bridge for Bluetooth devices that are just kind of laying around the house. They could pair with those and get out to the internet fairly easily. And I guess the problem is right now, like Bluetooth, the reason it looks so attractive is because it's in every single phone that exists on the market these days. Like
right.
That's where the Bluetooth numbers come from. It doesn't come from like being a substantial part of home automation products.
And
yeah. So, but this actually could make those sensors work well into the house. And I like the idea. I like where they're going with it. And like I said, I'm not trying to like shoot down the idea of a Bluetooth home automation system. Like it doesn't sound that compelling to me because this technology is not as battle hardened as the standards that exist these days. But this is one kind of like a clever hack around that. And I think for most people, if they were looking for, if this thing works the way they say it does, this may be something that really helps get that Bluetooth kind of home automation system off the ground. Because connecting, I've got one of those smart cookers after listening to Mike talk about them, like the Anova sous vide cookers, and it's Bluetooth. Like it only connects to my phone. It doesn't connect anything anywhere else. But if there was a way for it to connect to this hub and then out to the internet, and then I could remotely turn it on and off using the software that they provide,
right.
That would be great. And this little device, like you said, it's just something to kind of keep an eye on. I thought it was very interesting, and hopefully would lead to a better Bluetooth home automation system one day.
Yep, I like it. I saw that story and I thought it was interesting as well. So good choice. The product I picked in this category, which we kind of alluded to early, and hopefully it wasn't too much of a spoiler, but was the 7 Hugs remote control. Also thought about maybe giving them a name, or giving them an award for like most awkward name, but couldn't find anything else to go into that category, so they're head and shoulders above anyone else there. But 7 Hugs, that's the name. The remote control is just a prototype, so very early on. Works over Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and like I had kind of alluded to earlier, it's a pretty small form factor that you kind of hold in your hand. No tactile buttons, which I was a little bummed about. So it is kind of a touchscreen interface, but it's separate from your phone, and it's something that you could just leave kind of lying around on a coffee table or on the kitchen counter or whatever it is. And it's got intelligence built into it. Now it works, and I'm curious how well it works, using 3 smart plugs that you plug in different areas of your house, and that can kind of triangulate your position in the home. And based on that information, it's able to tell what you're pointing the remote at. So if you stand and you point the remote at a Philips Hue light, a certain interface comes up that allows you to then control that light. If you then take the remote and you point it at your Sonos system, a different interface comes up that allows you to control the music. And I believe they were also showing it work with Nest. So they had Nest, Philips Hue, and Sonos integration is what they were showing. Prototype once again, so very early on. But I love this idea, and they're kind of pitching themselves on, breaking our addiction in the smart home from using apps. And they want to be more creative, step outside of that box, give us some different options for the way we interact with the objects around us. And that's a big thing for me. It's, I think, one of the areas where we're very ripe for innovation, and would love to see these guys succeed with this product. And I'd also, again, I made a note, I'd love to see them come out with a product. I was envisioning right away like a similar product that might have 4 or 5 different tactile buttons on it, and maybe an app that you could then go and configure. Okay, if I'm pointing this remote at my Philips Hue light, I want this button to do this and this button to do that, etc. So kind of give you some back-end customization. I thought that would be really cool to kind of integrate the tactile control into that same concept. But even as they're showing it, a very cool idea, and one that I thought really, if they can execute on, could be a really neat product.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting interface. I think it's interesting that you picked a product with no buttons on it as your most intriguing and ambitious.
But I picked one that would be really cool if it had buttons.
Yeah, I love that you tagged that on to the end as well. So, all right, Jason, here comes the fun ones.
All right, this is our last one.
The worst of CES.
Save the best for last, or you get it.
Oh man.
Anyways, there were some good ones. There were some real gems this year. Seth, I'll let you lead out with one here. We've got more than 2 here. We're gonna move through them pretty quick.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna leave since we are a family show, I'm gonna leave the personal pleasure toys, adult toys, and that synced with your reader to. So when you're reading those romantic novels,
yeah, I think that's a good call. Discretion.
All right, I'm gonna say the GrillBot Roomba for the grill is probably one of the worst things I saw.
It's great. Just the fact.
There's a funny video.
You got to see the video. That is a great one. Got to see the video. Like, go to HomeTech.fm/94. If you didn't see this thing come out of CES, definitely worth about 5-10 seconds of your time. Go check out this video. Crazy to me that somebody would actually really get behind this and make it their life's work. But who knows? Maybe I'm just not seeing it. One of the ones that I wanted to hit on, at first, I got to admit, when I read this story, I thought maybe this product was done like tongue in cheek. And I thought maybe there could be like an angle here to kind of make a rather serious life event kind of lighthearted, but no, they're very serious about this thing. And it is a Bluetooth enabled pregnancy test. Yes, you heard that right.
Silence. Yeah, I don't know.
It is just like it sounds, and it goes for about $15 to $20. Disposable, Bluetooth enabled, links to an app on your phone, and you take this pregnancy test, and then kind of what they're selling the product on is that it'll help you ease your nerves as you're waiting that 3 or 4 minutes before the results kind of reveal themselves, and it'll play like a series of distractions on your smartphone. And then depending on
series of distractions.
Yes.
Oh my God, just put a countdown clock on the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, all you need is a timer and a normal pregnancy test.
Yeah. Or like, I don't know, open the YouTube app. Like if you really need to be distracted, I don't know. You can't make this stuff up.
Oh man.
And then, depending on the results, it'll like route you out to different resources and whatever. But, file this one squarely under the category of just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to say that is probably the worst one of CES.
It was my worst of, for sure. I think top of the class.
All right, well, there's another one I saw. There's in the world of baby tech, and I know this. We were actually looking at a lot of this last year.
A theme for me last year. Yep.
There is now a changing station that measures the amount of poop. So,
oh, that's brilliant.
I don't know. I'm going to leave this up to you to explain why that's important.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be a tough explanation. I don't know why that would be important. It is funny. I've joked with people before that what I really need is like a poop sensor of some sort, because sometimes, and parents will totally be able to relate to this. Your baby's in the crib, you've got the monitor on, and, without getting too graphic, you hear some noises, but you don't know like if there was anything behind those noises, so to speak. And so now you've got a very tough decision to make. Do I go risk waking my baby up, or do I risk, letting him or her sleep in what could potentially be a real mess? You know what I mean? And so I've always thought, I don't know how you would do that, but if you had some way of telling for sure what had just happened, it would be pretty nice. Now, with that said, I can't imagine a reason why I would ever need to weigh poop. I'll have to scratch my head on that one for a little bit.
Especially, it's a $299 smart changing pad that measures the baby's weight and keeps a tally of the number of diapers changed. So I guess it can weigh the poop and the baby, or just the baby.
I do know on a somewhat serious note, I guess, when you do have a brand new baby that you've just brought home, a newborn, the weight gain is a big thing that they watch as your newborn is going through their first few months, and they're really keeping an eye on, how much the baby weighs. And it's I guess, kind of a big deal, but not something to me that needed to happen in between doctor visits, I guess. I don't need a changing table to tell me that.
Yeah, well, kind of like having a Bluetooth pregnancy test. Like, it's just some of these things.
It's a brave new world, Seth.
Yeah, well, yeah. It certainly is.
All right. Well, let's wrap this thing up. Show went a little long. Really fun, though. Great. CES is always fun. And so really enjoyed sitting down and just dissecting the show and giving out some of our first ever Home Tech Awards. Had a lot of fun with that, and really want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening. I hope you enjoyed getting our take on the show. And if you have any feedback, any suggestions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. So you can do that in a number of ways. Probably one of the best ways is connect with us on Twitter at HomeTech Podcast, or shoot over to the website, HomeTech.fm/feedback, and shoot us a line over there. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, definitely. And if you've made it this far in the show, please go over to HomeTech.fm and sign up there for our newsletter. Jason's going to be doing some really cool stuff, getting together some really really cool information and sending it out over the next couple months. We sat down and started talking about some ideas that we've had.
Definitely.
That's how you get on that list and get to see some really cool stuff come from HomeTech. We're going to ramp that up, and I know you're excited about it. I'm excited about it. That's go over to HomeTech.fm. The little sign up things right there on the right. We won't spam you. We're not gonna send you crazy links to buy stuff. I don't even know what we would send you.
No spam. Exactly. Yeah, we're gonna ramp that up though a little bit. We've got a handful of people signed up for our email list already, but we want to start letting people know to go sign up for that. It's a great way. We send out, of course, weekly reminders about the show when the show airs with just kind of a brief description. Just kind of stay top of mind there. But also, and probably more importantly, we're going to start doing some exclusive stuff with that email list. So sending out kind of a weekly email, letting you know just sort of our take or my take on what some of the biggest stories are happening and why they matter. And so we'd encourage people, if you want to hear from us a little bit more or get a little bit more engaged, hop over to the website, sign up for the email list. It's a great way to do that.
Yep, definitely. So I guess that wraps up CES 2016. We'll look to see what happens next year in the world of, Bluetooth pregnancy testers and
and poop scales.
Real poop scales, yes. Oh my gosh.
All right, Seth. Well, fun show. I will let you go, and we will talk next week.
Sounds good. Talk to you then.